John Jessup, a once respected politician in Indiana, did the unspeakable to his own daughter while celebrating her 21st birthday in Las Vegas. The former Hancock County Commissioner pleaded guilty to attempted sexual assault after allegedly getting his daughter extremely drunk before assaulting her back at their hotel. Prosecutors say Jessup provided her with multiple Long Island iced teas, took her to a strip club where she became so incapacitated she needed a wheelchair ride back to the hotel, and later assaulted her while she was unconscious. He was sentenced in 2025 to 6 to 25 years in prison, must register as a sex offender, and is barred from all contact with his daughter for life. In 2005, 8-year-old Shasta Groen survived one of the most disturbing child abduction cases in U.S. history. A convicted predator invaded her family's rural Idaho home, killing her mother, older brother, and her mother's boyfriend before kidnapping Shasta and her 9-year-old brother Dylan. For nearly 7 weeks, the children were held in the Montana wilderness, where Shasta endured unimaginable abuse and was forced to witness Dylan's murder. She was finally rescued when staff at Denny's recognized her from missing child alerts and contacted police, leading to her captor's arrest. While the man responsible eventually died in prison, he left behind some chilling words, claiming that Shasta had taught him how to love, a grotesque attempt to justify his heinous crimes. The trauma he inflicted left Shasta struggling for years with grief, addiction, and survivor's guilt, and as a young adult, she cycled in and out of jail on charges related to substance abuse and theft. In recent years, she's fought to reclaim her life, becoming a mother and speaking out about the ordeal, but fresh tragedies continue to haunt her, most recently losing her home and treasured family keepsakes in a fire, perpetuating her ongoing battle against the shadows of her past. On Thanksgiving Day in 2022, a heartbreaking tragedy unfolded at the Albuquerque home of Carlin and Connie DeNeo. Carlin, a gentle and soft-spoken man who by all accounts would never hurt a fly, had been battling frontotemporal dementia, a degenerative brain disease that slowly erodes a person's sense of reality and control. In the weeks leading up to the incident, he'd been waking up in the middle of the night in a state of deep anxiety and confusion, often unable to recognize where he was or what was happening. On that devastating holiday morning, family members arrived to find Connie's body dismembered and Carlin severely injured from self-inflicted wounds. Though he admitted to the murder, it was painfully clear that he wasn't in his right mind, lost in the fog of a cruel illness that had taken over his thoughts and stripped him of reason. Friends and loved ones were left shattered, knowing this wasn't the man they knew, but the heartbreaking consequence of a disease that claimed them both. Carlin was taken into custody and charged with murder, but his health rapidly declined. Just 3 weeks later, he died in medical care. His final days spent in confusion, grief, and the fading remnants of a once peaceful life. In 2015, 19-month-old Jazira Thompson was left home in Houston with her two 3-year-old siblings while their mother and her boyfriend went out for pizza. During the 2 hours they were gone, one sibling stuffed her into the oven and the other turned it on. When the couple returned, the two older children were frantic and crying in the kitchen, pointing to the oven and babbling in panic. In the chaos, the appliance had tipped over onto its side, preventing the small children from lifting it to free her. Inside, Jazira's small body was curled up, with burn patterns showing she'd been alive when the heat began. Her legs and feet blistered from pressing against the hot metal, and scuff marks on the door where she desperately kicked to escape. She eventually died from full-thickness burns and shock before help had any chance of arriving. The mother, Raquel Thompson, and her boyfriend Cornelius Williams were arrested and charged with 4 counts of child endangerment. Both faced up to 20 years in prison for leaving the young children unsupervised in a house full of hazards. In 2005, during a heated argument over her newborn's paternity, China Arnold ended her 1-month-old daughter's life in a completely unimaginable way. The next day, she took the infant to the hospital, claiming she'd been unresponsive in her playpen. But an autopsy revealed the baby had suffered severe internal burns with no external damage, injuries only consistent with being placed in the microwave. Investigators determined she'd been inside for about 2 minutes, essentially cooking her from the inside out. The woman is now serving life in prison without parole. This is the grave of Vietnam War veteran Gene Simmers, who dedicated it to the elderly woman he'd killed more than 50 years before he died. In 2016, a man who lost his leg in a motorcycle accident convinced the hospital to let him keep his amputated leg. Weeks later, he invited friends over for tacos, made from slices of his own calf muscle. Everyone who ate it was a consenting adult, and since cannibalism itself isn't illegal in most states, no crime was committed. They described the taste as beefy but chewier. In 1965, 16-year-old Sylvia Likens and her sister Jenny were left by their carnival worker parents in the care of 37-year-old Gertrude Baniszewski in Indianapolis for $20 a week. But when the payments began arriving late, Gertrude took her anger out on Sylvia in a sadistic rage. She singled Sylvia out, accused her of being promiscuous, and began systematically breaking her down. Over the next 3 months, Gertrude enlisted her own 7 children and neighborhood kids into the abuse, turning her home into a torture chamber for Sylvia. The girl was beaten daily, burned with cigarettes, scalded with boiling water, and forced to eat her own excrement. She was often stripped of her clothes, humiliated in front of strangers, and forced to perform degrading acts for Gertrude's amusement. Gertrude and her children would eat full meals in front of Sylvia while she sat hungry, often taunting her and dangling food just out of her reach. She was regularly tied up in uncomfortable positions and was eventually banished to the basement, left to lie on a urine-soaked mattress in the dark. By October of 1965, Sylvia's body was so emaciated she could barely stand. At some point in her final days, a heated needle was used to carve into her abdomen the words, "I'm a prostitute and proud of it." After collapsing from brain swelling, internal bleeding, and shock, Sylvia died alone on the filthy basement floor. When police found her body, they described it as one of the most horrific cases of child abuse in American history. Gertrude, 2 of her children, and 2 neighborhood boys were convicted, but none served out their full sentences, some walking free in less than 20 years. The crimes of Gary Heidnik were so horrific they inspired the character Buffalo Bill in The Silence of the Lambs. In 1986, Gary turned his Philadelphia home into a dungeon of unspeakable horrors. He abducted 6 women, chaining them in his basement pit where they endured beatings, sexual assault, starvation, and even being forced to torture each other. 2 women were killed during the ordeal, and in one of the most grotesque acts, Heidnik dismembered a victim, ground up parts of her body, and fed it to the other prisoners. While he carried out these atrocities below ground, he held church services upstairs as if nothing were wrong. Heidnik's twisted plan, according to his lawyer, was to impregnate multiple women in hopes of creating what he called a perfect race. His crimes came to light in 1987 when one captive escaped and alerted police. Heidnik was sentenced to death and executed by lethal injection in 1999, becoming the last person ever put to death in the state of Pennsylvania.